Okay, hello everybody. This is Michele Seminara on the Verity Poetry podcast. And today we've got two incredible writers, but before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we come to you from the land of the Game people and we acknowledge past and present elders. I would like to now introduce our incredible writers. We're very, very lucky to have them. Mark Reid, whose new and selected poems, here we have it, brings together his current work with actually I think it's five other selected from five other books in there. And also, of course, we've got the fabulous Toby Davidson, the grand reopening. It's not very good placement of the books there, is it? So we've got these two incredible Australian poets today, speaking to each other's work as well as speaking to us. So Mark and Toby, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, no problem. No problem. Thanks for having us. Looking forward to it.
Well, thanks for the invitation.
Absolute pleasure. So congratulations to you both. I was wondering if you could take a moment to introduce yourself and introduce your books to our readers, to our listeners, viewers.
My name's Mark Reid, obviously. I'm talking to you from Oberon on Wiradjuri country. Uh, and this is my my new book. If I can stick that in front of my ugly face, that's The Blessed Affliction, available through Puncher and Watman. The Blessed Affliction is a full-length collection of new poetry written over the last 5 or 6 years, I suppose. And also there's a selection from my previous five collections, which go back to my first little book in the Five Islands New Poet Series, number three, back in 1995. So I'm showing my age. Uh,
Showing your age beautifully through your finely crafted verse.
Yeah. Yes, well, let's hope so. Certainly this book does sort of represent the work I've put in over the years,
Mm, mm.
over quite a few years.
That's right. And what about you, Toby? You want to introduce yourself and the grand reopening to us?
Yeah, hi everyone. Coming to you from the Central Coast, from Dark and Land. And yes, this is my third collection, the Grand Reopening, with a bunch of little tags to denote readings, which has also come out from Puncher and Watman this year. Um, and as the title kind of suggests, it drifts from the ending part of COVID, the kind of the grand reopening to normality, in also in inverted commas, and how profoundly unnormal that situation was, how abnormal. Then out into the world and beyond. So it's really the last 5 or so years of work. And yeah, continuing to explore the natural world a lot, the Australian history a lot, because there's always more to say there. And yeah, really trying to, I guess, consider a little bit even philosophically that kind of return to so-called normality with a different brain after a pandemic where you're just like, is this what I do? Is this who I am? Do I walk around corridors talking to people and, as I say in one of the poems, having to learn to avoid people physically again, and that kind of thing, and just some of the strange absurdities of those moments in time. So it's not so much a reliving of the pandemic. I don't want to put people through that, but it's about those moments of reattachment to the outside world, the daily world, and also into the wider world. And there's a final sequence as well that goes very much into the internal world as well.
Thank you. Okay, beautiful. Okay, we'll get into that in a minute, but I might start with asking you a few curly questions, Mark. So obviously, The Blessed Affliction, a new and selected is always a bit of a milestone publication, and as you say, you've got to that point in
Mm.
your career where you can now go back and sort of curate some of your past work and bring it and present it alongside your new poems. So I'm just wondering, you've pretty much got five books in one, or or is it six with the Blessed Affliction?
Well, six with the new
Yes,
poems.
yeah. So with the
The
old poems, how did you decide what to leave in, what to leave out?
Oh
I mean, even just getting one collection together, printing out all the poems and throwing them on the floor and trying to figure out how they talk to each other is a huge task. I can't
yeah.
imagine how you managed to do that over six books.
Well, yes, it it is a problem. It was a long time since I'd read my own work.
Mm.
Such reading your own work is not necessarily advisable at times, and it was a very odd feeling. But yes, I simply got the books down, you know, from the shelf, out from the drawers, dusted them
Mm,
off, and
mm,
and reread. And um, it wasn't quite as difficult as I thought it might be.
mm,
Um, I certainly originally, when I work on a collection, I work very hard on the thing as a whole.
mm.
I feel my work works best in collections rather than individually. Whether others agree with that or not, I don't know. I think most editors and judges of competitions for single poems think that because I have very little luck persuading them of the merit of
Don't
poems
we all,
individually,
Mark?
but I've been reasonably fortunate with the reception given to the collections. Um, so yes, look, I just read through and I could sort of see, okay, here to here to here to here. And I decided not to agonize over it too much.
Yeah.
Um, look, if you've got faith in your work, yeah, ultimately you do have to have faith in your work.
Yeah.
Uh, I simply went through. And occasionally there were decisions to make, like there were a lot of thematically, there are a lot of hospital poems,
Yeah.
for instance, and I had to
Yeah.
think, oh, okay, who's in and who's out there. But yeah, it wasn't quite as difficult as I thought it might be.
Oh,
And
good.
and like I say, I resolved not to agonize over it too much because I've done quite enough agonizing over the years anyway.
Well, that's right. Yeah. I was wondering, like, were you tempted to revise any of the poems? Like, poems never
No, I
seem to be
decided I
finished.
decided at the beginning not to.
Mm,
I find with selected poems and collecteds and things, reading other poets, I don't really approve of revisions because if
okay.
I'm reading your selected,
Mm,
I want to see how you develop as a poet,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So if you've gone back and revised your early work, I can't see that. Yeah. And
Mm,
so I it did have to adopt a strategy, a warts and all type strategy,
mm,
that okay, this poem might be improved, but I'm not going to do it. I'm not
yeah.
going to.
That's very disciplined of
The
you. I
poem is
don't
the
know
poem
if
as I
I'd.
wrote it. You know.
Good. I like that. Very honest.
Uh, you can really foul up poems sometimes too, I
Yeah.
mean,
You
I find when I'm
overworked on
working
them.
on poems,
Yeah.
yeah, you can get to a point where you work too much on them and
Yeah. Yeah.
you
So,
ruin it.
um, did you
Mm.
um, did you find sort of any unexpected continuities or contradictions
Yes.
between your older and your work as you were revising?
I found unexpected continuities. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, I had tended to think of the collections as quite separate. And when I
mm,
sat down and read them all sort of together, yeah,
yeah.
I thought, oh, okay. Yes, you're not as varied as you might think,
It was
Mark.
mercurial. You've been mulling over the same issues for 30 years, like all of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, indeed, I mean, poems, a bit like faith, it's not about
Yeah.
resolution, you know.
That's right. Exactly. Did you get
It's
any
about
moments where it
process, it's
was
about
like,
question.
yes. Did you get any moments where you actually, because I've picked up poems and thought, oh, who wrote that? Because it's been a long while ago. Did you
Yeah.
get any poems that you actually couldn't remember writing? And it's just like, oh my
Yes.
gosh.
Yeah, there were. Yeah. Yeah. Not so much in the books, but sometimes when I go back, to the piles of notes and abandoned or set aside pieces, I think, yeah,
Mm.
I don't remember writing that. Yeah, I just don't. And oddly enough, for my previous book, Blindside, I did that. I had a bit of a stalled period, and if a stalled period goes on for too long, I might go back to the
Mm,
drawer and see what's in there.
mm. I
And
was
I actually
wondering,
found a poem.
sorry, go on.
Sorry, I found a poem that I had set aside 10 years previously because I
Wow.
couldn't quite get it right. And there
And
I
did
was
you
10
did
years
you
later, I
did you
read it
get it right?
and I thought, oh, if I do this and this and this, yeah, and yeah, and it went, a
Fell into
decade or more
place.
later, it went in the book. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. So when you were going through the poems, because your poetry seems fairly autobiographical, did you get any shocks sort of seeing different versions of yourself and how you viewed yourself, through the years?
Uh, at times, yes,
Mm,
yes, at times. Um, it's a bit sort of it's a bit sort of odd. I've just come off a disability pension and onto the age pension, but I was on a disability pension for 15 years or so with a bipolar disorder. And, and it was a bit funny that reading the books from prior to the diagnosis, not that I
yeah,
like diagnoses very much,
yeah.
but yeah, I could see these signs. The Og poems, looking out from
Ah,
Bashan, the
yeah,
Republic of Og, for instance, which deals with the pre-flood Old Testament giant Og. And one of the
yeah,
themes is that Og is alternatively big and alternative and small. Yeah, Og is going from tiny to huge,
yeah.
and, yeah, that became a bit of a surprise given when I had a label to
Mm.
attach.
Ah, interesting. Yeah. So you could sort of, in a sense, you were
Yeah.
diagnosing yourself by rereading the poems.
Oh yeah, well, I think we're all diagnosing ourselves in poetry, aren't we? I mean, um,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, yes.
I
Well,
wonder if
any
you could,
decent poet is anyway, because
I think
because you've
so.
got to examine yourself.
Yes, of course, of course. Why else would we be
Yeah.
writing poetry, I think.
Well,
But anyway,
indeed, this may be why poets are crazy, but you
yes, that's another podcast. I wondered if you could read us one of these poems. I was really struck by
sure.
this one called Mnemonic. It's page 147, and it's one where you sort of meditate on the past and memory and how you move on and if you move on and what you leave behind. I thought that might be an excellent one.
147. Oh, mnemonic. Yes,
Yes. Yeah, you remember
yes,
that one?
yeah. I do. Yeah, this is from. What is this from? This is from
Which book was
Difficult
that from?
Faith.
Yep.
Yeah, this is from A
Difficult
Difficult
Faith, yeah.
Faith, which was published in 2006.
Mm,
And it's part of a sequence called Living Next Door to Alberto Cairo.
mm,
So I was quite enamored with Fernando Pessoa at the time. And I
mm.
still am. Anyway, yes, mnemonic. The thing about the past is there's always more of it. The past, like the ocean, just gets deeper. It is the house I am always on the point of leaving, poised in the doorway, feeling something's left behind. Whatever it is cannot come with me. For this we have memory, that grievous epic that washing up on the tattered foam, that just as I bend for is clawed back down the wet, naked sand. Who I am slips into the past, the phantom ache of an amputee, the incident with the car door, when I jammed my thumb, how Mum took it in her mouth and sucked.
Thank you. I
That's a bit
love that
Freudian,
one.
isn't
Yes, it
it?
is, yes. Um, I was thinking, so that's obviously one of the older poems in the book
Mm.
from, well, basically 20 years ago now.
Yes,
I'm
yes,
wondering
you don't remind
about
me.
the yeah, I'm wondering about the new work in the
Mm.
Blessed Affliction and sort of what new directions or preoccupations did you find yourself exploring in this latest collection?
Um, well, I suppose it's an increasing preoccupation with faith.
Mm,
Um, I would think of myself as a Christian. A lot of Christians wouldn't. uh, given the reservations I have about a lot of doctrine, but I'm particularly interested in Christian mysticism and apophatic traditions. And of course, this is one of the things that connected me to Toby. I met Toby first. I knew of him because he was a mate of old mate Mal McKimmie and others. And I met Toby in Melbourne when I was at the Melbourne Writers Festival.
Mm,
What year was
And
this
he
now?
was working on his PhD,
mm,
which
Ah,
later became his first book, Christian Mysticism in Australian Poetry.
mm. Yeah, it's around 2006, 2007, I think. Around there.
Yeah, yeah, seven, yeah, 6 or 7, yeah, yeah. Uh, so I certainly owe Toby something there uh, in terms of, I mean, obviously having written books like with titles like Parochial and A Difficult Faith, um, I was already moving in that direction. But meeting Toby and talking to him and later reading his book was one of the things that enlarged my interest and my knowledge, and Toby recommended readings for me and such.
yeah, I was really moved by a lot of the sort of more religious and spiritual poems in the collection. A lot of Australian poets don't touch that sort of thing anymore. It's kind of
Yes. Yeah.
unfortunately gone out of fashion, which I just think, well, what's poetry for if we're not
Well, I
grappling
think
with
the
the
two things
biggest
are very
questions?
closely related, you know?
I think so too. There was a poem I was really struck by. So, page 61, Genesis,
Mm,
and I might actually get you to read that one. It was beautiful. Um, and talking, and I wanted you to read this one because I think this really does actually sort of bring out that connection between the poetic and the religious, specifically in your work. So maybe if you
mm.
if you could read that one for us, it's 66,
Okay.
61,
Well,
sorry.
yeah, yeah. Uh, this is from a sequence called the Address Book,
Mm,
which plays off the John Berryman's 11 addresses to the Lord, uh, which is a late work by Definitely. But yeah, I read that. I was reading that over and over and over, and I started to write these poems, which in the end didn't resemble Berryman's at all, other than in their direct address of the
mm,
deity.
mm,
So this one's called Genesis. The poem, Lord, is an aspiration, the poem in which I invest. Weighted in language, the poem aspires to be lifted, raised. The poem seeks to transcend. Laid out like the patient, the poem waits to be inspired. The poem must breathe. I have littered about these papers, notes, and files across the awful scrimmage of my desk, strewn in this my unkempt garden. They are demanding of me a justice. They are pleading for form. They call out to me as if from the ground. One more day, Lord, one more of the 7. I trawl again these failed and floundering verses and drafts, these troubled and flawed creations of mine, as I am of yours.
mm. Beautiful. That's a stunning one. I think it's such a shame. I suppose you can't see it that way, that people don't sort of grapple more with spirituality in
Yeah,
poetry as much. Yeah. Sorry, there's my dog flapping.
Mhm.
Hope he's
oh,
not
that's
decided
good.
to wake up.
Pets are welcome.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a debt there also to Eliot, of course, in the
Mm,
being laid out like the patient.
yes. Yeah.
Mm.
Um,
In pre-flight, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really
yeah.
beautiful. The
Well,
other
these things.
poems, sorry, go on.
No, you're.
The
I
other
was just going to
poems
say
that
these
I
things. These things tie in. You find you find things you've read obviously surfacing. things
Yes,
that
yeah,
you've known for, you know, I mean, the Eliot poems, those
yeah.
brilliant 1917 poems were crucial in getting me into poetry, It's
Mm,
cool,
yeah,
yeah.
beautiful.
So I've known
Um,
that all along, yeah. Uh, and the calling out from the ground, when Cain kills Abel and he comes back and God
mm,
says, "Where is your brother?" I hear him calling out from the ground.
mm, yeah, yeah. I was thinking about that, in terms of like sort of this post-colonial sort of push to sort of in some ways tear down the canon, and I'm all for like increasing the
Yeah.
canon, let's open it up. But the idea that it's not
Yeah.
important to sort of read that sort of work anymore, I just find that in
Oh, yeah.
itself quite
Yeah.
sacrilegious.
Toby and I were talking about this yesterday on the phone
Mm,
about the iconoclasm. Was I
mm,
read the editorial on your website
ah,
and was saying how yes, I mean the new generation always wants to be the iconoclasts,
mm,
and so they should be. They're always, the new generation should always take down the last,
yeah,
learn from them, and take them down, and that
mm,
I suppose that's a Freudian impulse too, yeah. But certainly in the poetry, there's uh, the urge to create,
mm,
which is part of being made in the image, part of the imitation of God. It's that impulse to create. But yeah, I think it is a thing of Australian poetry,
yeah,
and probably Australians generally, that we're a bit scared of spiritual matters,
mm,
and and particularly that generation of poets that came, the so-called generation of '68 that came in the late '60s, early '70s, and through the '80s, who had an absolute distrust of anything personal, anything that might be seen as being sentimental. Uh, you know,
yeah,
the obvious exception, of course, being Robert Harris. Great poet and one brave enough to swim against that tide.
mm,
And and in doing so, I think he lifted himself above the the malaise of of his peers,
mm,
if that makes
mm,
sense. But I'm a great
yeah,
admirer of Robert Harris and that collected poems that Alan Wern published,
mm,
the Gang of One,
mm,
compulsory reading. Yeah,
mm. Another thing that really struck me in the collection was the hospital poems, and I
yeah,
suppose these do tie in with the sense of spirituality as well, because obviously, working in a hospital and you see people sort of at their lowest ebb, and then people's natures often sort of come through quite quite strongly, whether they're humble and accepting, whether they're angry and raging, all these sort of things. I think you capture all these different characters really, really beautifully. The human sort of spirit that arises once the body is decaying. Yeah. Did you ever, when
mm,
writing those poems, do you ever I don't know. I suppose I was thinking about how do you approach writing those poems. So it's in sense it's an invasion of privacy of the subject.
yeah,
When you've seen them at their very worst with their undies down and this and that, and then what?
yeah,
How do you write that? Should you write that? How do you feel about that?
yeah. It was a real issue for me at the time.
Mm,
And the manuscript that Fremantle Arts Centre Press back then first accepted didn't have any of the hospital poems in it.
mm,
I was developing them at the time, and I was holding them back for those very reasons. I had moral uh, trepidations about, whether it was okay to use people in that respect, in that way, even though I wasn't identifying any of them. But the my editor on the book, the late Wendy Jenkins, who we tragically lost recently. Um, Wendy's very smart reader. She was terrific, really smart reader. And anyway, I remember we had our first meeting, and she said, "Yeah, that's good. Now next time, bring anything new you've got." And I thought, oh, okay. So I brought these along and I told her why I'd been holding them back. I talked about these trepidations, and she just said, no, absolutely, you've got to include these. She said, trust me. I remember that she said, trust me, I have a very acute antenna for these things. And she did. And she did. And as I say in the acknowledgements to the Blessed Affliction, I learned a great deal from Wendy, working on two books on parochial and a difficult faith. She taught me a great deal, and yeah, greatly missed.
Yeah. Would you like to read us one of your hospital poems? I had a
Sure.
couple that I love, but maybe you should pick your fave.
Uh, did you want Jono?
I love everyone probably wants Jono. Everyone probably needs a bit of Jono in their life, I reckon.
Or do you want, or can I read two side
Why
by
not?
side?
Yes, that's a nice
Side
idea.
by side. They're on opposite pages. So the
Mm,
first one is Hard Yards.
mm.
After months in rehab, she's getting hold of her voice again. Now, when offered tea, she makes a choice to will this autonomy, this anatomy to speak for her, to manage yes to milk and no to sugar, to even attempt the flourish of a please, as halting but verbatim, she unburdens herself of each monosyllable, the enormity of word. And Jono, the language alert.
Hmm.
Jono, Jono swears incessantly in his stroke victim slur, fucking this and fucking that, or laments a lost wife, howls her name, curses his own. Says he's been bad, a bad fucking man. Calls us cunts, then apologizes. Can't fucking help it. Night shift can't quiet him, so he's wheeled into the games room to curse the pianola. At breakfast, he has his own little table in the corridor where he's tied to the chair. Asked why no cunt likes him, I say, because you call them cunts. He tells me I'm all right, a good cunt. Morning shift, he's strapped in bed, madly rattling the cot rails. Says, hey cunt, can you stop me fucking doing this?
Excellent, thank you.
Anyway, so
Um,
they're the hospital poems, and
yeah,
yeah, things I found myself compelled to write.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that you do it actually with a great deal of respect and humor as well, which, if you've ever worked or been in hospitals, you get by on the humor, when the chips are down, it's very
Yeah.
dark humor, but that you've got to do it, right? So
Yeah.
I just think,
That's
definitely in terms of the respect you pay the subject, it never comes across as invasive or anything like that. I think
uh,
yeah, I think it's important
well, as I
work.
say, I owe a debt to the guidance of Wendy on that. Yeah.
Mm, mm. Toby, I
A
wanted
good
to
editor can be invaluable, you know.
yeah, of
Yeah.
course, yeah, of course. I wanted to bring you in, Toby. You've been a long time fan and reader of Mark's work, and just for your observations on any sort of shift that you sense from his old work to his new work, how his work has developed and what you've enjoyed about watching that.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I first came across Mark on the page. I was working at the time at the Lane Bookshop in Claremont in WA, and
Mm,
just after I'd finished at University of Western Australia, and um, it was a great little independent bookshop, still is, and they had a great poetry section, and they also very sneakily paid us in cash with a 40% discount on books. So I ended up handing half of
excellent.
it back at least. So I had a wonderful bookshelf and 2-minute noodles to live on. But it was all worth it. So yeah, I came across Mark on the page because his first collection, Parochial, won the West Australian Premier's Prize for poetry when it still existed, and so it was, and I was also reading through all the Fremantle Press poets, and I was really struck by Mark's work, by the spareness
Mm,
on the page,
mm.
nothing goes to waste.
Mm.
Whereas I was the opposite. I was just, I still hadn't really learned to edit, so it was all just stuff pouring out of my brain.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I was reading him, and then I sort of continued to read more and more of his work. And of course, Mark's from Sydney, but he's an honorary West Australian for living many years in the West, and so we have a shared friendship network, and of course met in the East with now he's part of the bunch of East and West Australians, even on honorary level, and so. I think actually in many ways the form on the pages remained almost the same. I mean, if you hold the
Mm.
work at arm's length, it looks fairly similar in a lot of ways, although with some obvious variations. Um, I think he's always kind of had it, to be honest, and I think he still has it. So I'm a big fan of Mark, as you know, and we launched each other's books recently, and I think more people should know about his work, which like mine doesn't get any love from prizes. The occasional collection does get some interest. Mark's much more than mine, but I think there's always been a sort of a I don't know. I kind of searching for the soul of any situation, or that you can feel that he's not just there to, observe this and that,
Mm.
and it reminds me of something or other, and how lovely, and see you in the next poem.
Mm.
He's constantly, and again, yeah, if you read him across a whole collection, you can see this constant searching, which really aligns him with that longer history in Australian poetry of people searching for what is beyond them, beyond words even.
Mm.
And it's what's always interested me. And of course interests me when I'm plugging this guy, Francis Webb, and he's had his centenary this year. I'm the editor of his collected poems, and I've run the Francis Webb reading for a number of years. Michele, you've been to that, and Mark, you're a
Mm.
stalwart of that. There is that long tradition of searching for what is beyond, but also not searching in a comfortable way. I really like poets who aren't too comfortable, that turn things back on themselves, that ask tough questions that even can't be answered, that leave work on the jagged edges sometimes. And Mark has always done that. He's probably even got better at it, to be honest. And I've you can read one great thing about the Blessed Affliction here
Mm.
is that it's a great retrospective of his work, and it's a great place to jump onto his work for a lot of people who haven't come across it.
Mm.
And you can really see it's quite a generous selected,
Yeah.
and you can really read across a lot of his work, and you can see some of that development, but also how he's kind of been doing the same thing all the way along, just in a number of varieties of ways.
Mm.
And he's my kind of poet. He's someone who's searching for what is beyond, for what words are scratching to even reach, to the psychodrama of life, the cosmos, the universe, omnipotence, everything,
Mm.
and also what part we play in it, and but also the natural world of creatures. He's a great writer of creatures as well, and I'm
Yeah.
a great lover of creatures too. Again, not in a facile way. Sometimes with the tough questions and realities that creatures reflect back at us.
Mm.
So I think he's always really kind of had it. Although you can see certain turns in certain collections, such as the Odd Collection, which is a themed collection. But there's so much autobiography through that. There's so much truth that comes through a mask, that you can sort of see that washing across his works, and some of the poets he's so obviously influenced by as well, including in Australia, but also internationally, um, and really a lot of those spiritual traditions of, as he puts in his collection, a difficult faith. I'm not religious myself, even though I did write a book on Christian mysticism and Australian poetry. I was raised in the Anglican tradition, but I'm sort of drifting out there somewhere now. But those things of the opposite of kind of the smug mega church kind of version of Christianity, the more drawn down, tough kind of
Mm.
versions. In fact, that it's no coincidence in the Gospel of Mark. It's the most sort of ragged of the Gospels. It's the most sort of pared down. Some think it's maybe it's the earliest written. There's even a sort of a nude run by the author at one point who runs off naked, in sheer distress at what's going on in the persecution
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
That's not something that a comfortable writer does. And writing the things that sometimes we don't want to write. I mean, our shared friend, Mal McKimmie, has a line in one of his poems, I do not want to write this poem, which repeats. It's writing the things that we're compelled to write, that we sometimes don't want to write, that ask questions that we don't want to ask. And there's that push and pull with sort of mystery and the will of the poem for me. There's my will as the person who's trying to shape this thing, but there's also the will of the poem itself, and the more you can listen to that will and kind of the back and forth between them, that's probably the best advice I'd give any poet would be to not romp over the will of the poem. Listen to what it's trying to say, what it's straining to say. And poets who kind of insert themselves over the top, you can feel sometimes
Yeah.
the poem trying to get out from under their oppressive grasp a little bit.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
good way of saying it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So sometimes those who shoehorn poems into particular, things, you can feel that. And Mark never does that. In fact, he sort of
Mm.
he trends to the opposite side of just letting the piece be itself. But then, of course, what he does is a magnificent illusion at the same time because it's so
Mm.
crafted.
Yeah.
It's so crafted, but it's been let out first. It hasn't started with
Yes.
craft. It's been let out, and he's been thinking these things and feeling these things, and then the craft comes in, and then from the craft come new mysteries as well.
Mm. Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
so it's a very
that's a lovely summary. Yeah, I think that's probably what I got most reading the collection. Yeah, it just this sense of always, yeah, striving and questioning and the mystery, but not wanting to pin the mystery down, letting the mystery be, both inside the poem and as kind of the
Yeah, you don't have to have all the answers or have all the virtual morality sewn up,
mm, mm,
And I'm always interested yeah, I've always been interested, even before I really knew what poetry was. I think
mm,
the poets who I really liked were the ragged ones who just
yeah,
were a bit uncomfortable with things that asked tough questions about the self or about religion or about history,
mm,
and told uncomfortable truths, even ones they could barely bear to say.
yeah,
That keeps me interested.
yeah,
And that's what I try to.
That's a big thing, isn't it, with your with your reading, figuring out what poetry is.
mm,
And I mean that never ends, of course, but this is why you've got to read as much as you possibly
Yeah.
can. And if you have, yeah, by the time you by the time you're 35, 40, if you haven't filled at least one room with a book, you're not serious with
Mm.
books, I should say. You're not serious. Yeah.
mm. Very true.
Yeah.
Well, Toby, I wanted to ask you a few questions about grand reopening. So, obviously, the reopening that you're explicitly referring to is the reopening of our, the lifting of our lockdowns and shutdowns and this kind of re-entry into life, which is a really interesting subject. I'm wondering if it was other things as well, a grand reopening for you emotionally or intellectually, if you could sort of talk a little bit about the different valences of that word for you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it almost began a bit sardonically. It's like, oh yeah, the
Mm,
grand reopening, here we go, kind of thing. When I
hmm
was living it, and we've had a few years now since, so
Yeah.
it's probably a little easier in some ways to revisit. Although we have to be careful about um, uh, sort of having that rear vision knowledge or having that
Mm,
knowledge in hindsight. A lot of people, you know, say, oh, the government shouldn't have done this or that or whatever. Fine, criticize the government, but
mm,
remember what they knew and what they didn't know at the time.
mm,
And it's easy to know years later what would have been a better call to make. Um, yeah, I've got one poem in there called Tyranny, which is about a lot of anti-lockdown activists screaming about the tyranny of government. At the same time, I was reading a book by Dennis Foley and Peter Reid called
mm.
What the Colonists Never Knew, about
Oh,
the
that's
history
great.
of
Yeah.
tyranny in Australia by the
Mm,
British
yeah.
in the very same places. And that jarring between the two is like, well, you want tyranny? Look a bit deeper, my friend. And of course, a lot of them were wearing the Australian flag with the Union Jack on it. It was
Yeah.
all very close. So I was kind of addressing that there. So there were all those,
Mm,
but yeah, there is a kind of strange grandeur to it. There's also the grandeur of the natural world, which is never far away, and how the isolation of the collection starts towards the end of that sort of isolation period,
mm,
and how suddenly, going out was a big deal, but also going out, and sometimes you would have these interactions with creatures. And one of the and I was near the ocean in Newport, in Sydney at the time. And one thing we saw, we're at a flat with an ocean view, were a lot of whales that year because there were so few boats. Suddenly, all the whales were
mm,
everywhere. And there was
mm.
this kind of, it's like the natural world's always been waiting for us to switch off in a
Yeah,
way.
that's so true,
Yeah.
actually. You're right,
Yeah.
actually. What was lockdown for us was actually a reopening of the
Yeah.
boundaries of the natural world
Yeah,
for
and it
animals.
happened right across the natural world. There was a bumper year
Yeah,
for salmon and bears in Alaska.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
There were
yeah.
all of these creatures once the human world suddenly became quiet. The
Yes.
rest of the world, the natural world that we share this planet with, yeah, just amplified
Yeah, yeah,
spontaneously
yeah.
in this way. Just and it just shows what's really there waiting to happen.
Yeah.
But of course, at the same time, you've also got all the horror of being in a pandemic.
Mm,
At the time, I was writing a book about Prime Minister John Curtin's love of poetry in the Second World War, and actually being in another crisis actually was quite helpful in a way,
mm,
to actually live in another time of in extremis, through writing, but
mm.
also one which I knew the ending of.
Yes, that's true.
So there was a
Yeah, there
comfort in
was a
that.
lot of that, wasn't there? A lot of sort of casting back to people as sort of as a generation, depending on your age, have forgotten that these things happen, right? And we've become very complacent with our comfortable existences. And so there's this kind of hysteria around hard times. But as you say, if you look back not so long ago, things go up, things go down, and
Yeah, that's
people did cope. I was wondering what I thought it was quite ironic in some senses the title, the grand reopening as well, because what I really liked about it is because then you went on to put at the front of the collection a lot of poems about things like going to get a haircut, going to the pub, all these prosaic things. So I like the irony between the grand reopening and then I'm getting a haircut. So
Haircuts are
I really
overrated.
enjoyed those. Oh, haircuts. Yes, exactly. Overrated and expensive. I wonder if you'd read us one of your grand reopening poems. I was thinking about Return to Hotel Stain,
sure.
because that's very close to me. I actually think I met my husband in Hotel Stain, which
Oh,
is a bit
really? Yeah.
sad.
Yeah, Jennifer Harrison's got some great poems about the Hotel Stain as well, which is right, literally across the road from Manly Beach. So
Yeah.
the old pub there. For those who don't know it, Stain means stone in Dutch, I believe. And I lived in Manly for quite a while, so I would go back there to socialize and play table tennis and stuff like
Mm,
that. And this is one of the first trips back. Yeah, so there's a series of kind of like literal return poems at the start about returning to the theatre or returning to teach at Macquarie University, where I do, and so on and so forth. But I don't linger there for too long. Um, but okay, let's jump to this one. So yes, I've got some whale poems. There it is. Return to the Hotel Stain. The beer tastes as good as avoiding the present, regenerating social cues, scratching my head in 360 degrees. Is this careless? Is it care? I'll raise the wrist on a need-to-know basis and elbow bump fairy lit ninjas like me, a dance floor denuded of accents and tans. My voice feels scratchy by 9, and no convo can shake itself free from the saved and irretrievable. Skull, cut loose. Is it careless? Is it care? The past can strike out in a roped off area. Bouncers kick an old soul out in real time, and I choke in the ping pong final to grief from the threadbare crowd, too Anglo, too male. Then it's back to the taps with my consolation tenor, where I'm pinned and at the mercy of a maggot close talker, and remotely fantasize I'm handing over for his murder. It's
great ending.
poets aren't always wonderful people, and I think admitting to some of the someone was obviously not caring about my health at that point.
Mm,
Just um, there is a lot of very high moral poetry being written. Ironically, it's almost the return of the 19th century a little bit in some of that.
Mm.
Whereas I think sometimes, even irrational or dark or absurd thoughts
Mm.
are still valuable to learn from, and it is a reminder of that time that someone, drunk speaking too close to me made me think, fantasize as I'm handing over my money to the bartender that I'm, paying for someone to get rid of this guy, literally, in order to get through that
Instead, you
moment.
just wrote a poem about him.
Yeah, and also, you have the pub there, which was before COVID, which was full of people from all over the world. There'd be,
Mm.
French there, Brazilians there, people,
Yeah.
all kinds of people all over the world who come for the table tennis and to drink there, and it'd be full. And then you go back to this threadbare version, which is, yeah, as I say, too Anglo, too male, lack of
Yeah.
accents and tans, and it's a, yeah, it's you realize that what you're going back to is not where you left it off. And that's a
Mm.
really tough lesson of that grand reopening, is that you're not coming back. It's not paused and then
Mm.
restarted. You're coming
Mm.
back to an altered version of what you had. And then what do you do with
Yeah.
that? And how do you deal with that? And what does that
Yeah.
say about everyone and everything?
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. Australian became much more Australian, you know, in that time, as every country would have. You know, yeah, it's I hadn't thought about that. You're right. We didn't have all the different accents and other things going on to distract us.
Mm.
Yeah. I was wondering about, you talked a little bit about your the natural world in your
Mm.
poetry, and I loved and really enjoyed the depictions of different landscapes. A lot of ocean poems in there as well. But I was thinking about the way in your poetry, it sort of struck me as it always, well, from your previous collections as well, that
Mm.
it reminds me a bit of a Sydney Nolan painting, where like the little tin figure, the little Ned Kelly
Oh,
looks
yeah.
like he's like a little
Quite
toy on
well.
this vast,
Yeah, yeah.
vast, yeah, 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 this
Yeah.
vast, ancient landscape, and other, cultures such as Aboriginal culture. It's there and it's painted different. And then you've got this little tin figure on the top, and it's our history writing in and
Yeah.
dominating for this moment, and it struck me
Yeah.
that you really capture that beautifully in your poems. There's this substrata underneath of this much more um, ancient thing culturally and in terms of the natural environment going on. And then you really nicely just have them both going and this other little modern thing just fluffing over the surface, and making it look really insignificant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, that's reflective of my experience growing up in I was born in 77, so I mostly grew up in
Mm,
the 80s and 90s
mm,
in Perth. And we were told very little about Aboriginal Australia at all,
mm,
except for the occasional sort of ahistorical, here's a drawing of people around a billabong to colour in or something.
mm,
Um, and or the occasional trip to a museum with artifacts from the Western Desert or something, which was, beyond imagining how far away that was. There was no sense of the ground beneath your feet as Aboriginal land. I was never told that, never knew it. It's so different to the generations that have come after now, thank goodness. And I certainly didn't know about the Noongar language. I was on Moorjoke Noongar land, and so over time, I've come to understand more and more of our shared history, and also to read a lot of great Indigenous poets. It's a golden age right
mm.
now for First Nations poets, and it has been for a
Mm.
while, but it's gone up
Yeah,
exponentially.
yeah.
And there's been a series of at high school I got a little bit of Udru, and I think in high school and university I got a bit of Kevin Gilbert, so I started to get more into
Mm,
the political side of things there. But it's still a long way in my mind from Western Australia.
mm,
And but then I read Holocaust Islands, which won the David Yapon Award in 1990. Um, and it was and it's followed up by Holocaust Island. It was all about Rottnest Island in Western Australia. Um, the the writer's name has fled my head. It'll come back.
Graham Dixon, was it?
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah. Yeah, Graham Dixon. My apologies, a Noongar writer. And he was one of the first ones to write that very political, very direct poetry in the style of, or was in a similar tone to Kevin Gilbert, but it was in Western Australia. It was about Noongar land. It was about Western Australian history. It was about Rottnest Island, aka Wadjalop. It was about the ground beneath my feet, and that shook me out of my complacency in a big way. I was like, oh, there's a whole lot I'm not being told here, and how the colonial is also the contemporary,
Mm.
how those things have continued and morphed over time, and what is what is going on in terms of deaths in custody, for example.
Yeah.
And that was a little a little way after the Deaths in Custody Royal Commission. And of course, unfortunately, it's still such an issue, but how that can be connected to the colonial history. And he made those connections for me.
Mm.
Yeah, I owe Graham Dixon a great deal for that. And it also showed me what poetry could do as well in terms of reaching through time into history and
Mm.
acknowledging things that are bigger than us. And also, we're on this ancient continent,
Mm.
and you certainly feel that in Western Australia. And I could feel that,
Mm.
but I also didn't know the processes by which um, I had ended up, popping up in 1977 as part of this longer colonial project. So a lot of poets understand that much better now. But I had to almost learn it in real time. And luckily, thank goodness, I did Aboriginal history at university, because suddenly that just it was run by Tom Stanage, who was a great history professor, who wasn't Indigenous, but he got in a lot of Indigenous speakers, a lot of Noongar speakers and others, and they just said, "You want to know the truth? We'll give it to you." And I really needed that, because I had scraps of things. I was reading the newspapers, and I knew about some things that were issues, and things like that. So that also then started me. After that, I could then pursue it myself a lot more and keep reading, obviously. But I had some sense of what I hadn't been told, and then I
Mm.
was like, well, why wasn't I told? And then
Mm.
on it went. So I was on a bit of a journey of discovery along those ways, and it did affect how I wrote about the continent itself, and the way that it shapes us as
Mm.
humans.
Mm.
And But also, um, I have my great grandfather was a radical poet, a socialist poet, and so I always blame my mum's side of the family for the political radical side of things. Uh, so yeah, maybe it's in the blood, but uh, yeah, I think I've also just coming from fairly left-wing parents who are teachers as well. I've got a
Yeah.
really strong sense of injustice. My dad particularly was, is had a really strong sense of that, but
Mm.
my mum as well, on many different levels. And then if I started to ask them questions about politics, they would tell me. In fact, sometimes even if I didn't ask, they would tell me. So I was very fortunate in that way as well. But it was Graham Dixon and other First Nations poets I read after that who really, really gave me the unvarnished truth.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Wow,
Mm.
that's incredible. Thank you for that. Now, talking about In Your Blood, we're going to move on to a part of the book that was, it's a whole suite of poems. His Blood Whispers called The Deathless Intelligence. It's a very enigmatic title there. And you're basically sort of personifying this whisper in your blood, which is a symptom of clipple terran. Oh, you can say it for me now. I've forgotten,
Yeah,
Toby.
sure. I've had to say it a few times in my life. Yeah, no, Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome, which is a
That's
vascular syndrome, which is named after the two French professors and doctors who first named it and discovered it.
mm,
So it's a fairly rare genetic mutation, actually. So a proud
mm.
mutant stands before you. And one of the things I remember growing up was that one of the things that I was told, and also reading a little bit about it, was that there was a blood whisper that and all blood whispers to a degree, if you listen in with ultrasound
Mm,
or whatever, you can hear it. But this is particularly pronounced, and it's something I can feel as well as hear with
mm,
ultrasound. So it's something I've sort of lived with in a way for a long time. So I got to the end of the collection, and I thought there's something. It sort of needs something else. It needed something which was a turn in some way, maybe even something
yeah.
surreal or something different. And so I use that idea of the blood whisper to actually give voice to the. So the whole thing is written in the voice of my blood, and the actual syndrome itself. Or the blood calls itself the spokes whisperer for the syndrome. and they're following in some ways the medieval tradition of body soul dialogues, where often the body and soul talk to each other, and sometimes
Ah,
there's the mind as well. And sometimes complain back and forth to one another. Often the soul is immortal, of course, and the body has to deal with the complaints of the real world. So my mutated version of this is the title that unusually I came up with the title first, which was His Blood Whisper Skulls, a Deathless Intelligence. So I am known a bit for my way out titles, I suppose. But then I was like, okay, I've now got to write this thing, and it sort of became its own kind of quite
mm,
spare stuff on the page. I don't know if you can see how well that too well. Just see if I can get
mm,
it there. You can see like these little sort of islands of text
yeah.
in there, these short tercets. So there are 16 parts, and I've written in voices before in the previous collection, Creature Quatrains, which is also 16, but different creatures. But this is all one voice. The Deathless Intelligence, the poet is asleep. The Blood Whisper speaks, scolds the Deathless Intelligence, who doesn't speak, but sort of arrives as a kind of glowing shape that the Blood Whisper has seen before, and the Blood Whisper starts to complain about how the Deathless Intelligence wants to bond with a poet for to write poetry and stuff, and the Blood's like, hey, I wrote poetry with him as well, but also when you guys are off together, he doesn't eat properly, you kind of wither him, and I have to deal with the fallout every time you leave. So there's a sort of a triangular relationship going on there in a
Ah,
way. It also um, draws upon this idea I've had sometimes writing, where you can feel like you're in touch with something else, or a kind of possession, or something beyond,
mm,
which can be wonderful and or galling, depending on where you're at. And so here I call it the Deathless Intelligence, but even that title, which is one given by the poet, the Blood Whisper doesn't particularly like and doesn't really believe. All right, I'll read a little bit of
yeah,
one. Yeah.
thank you.
So there's 16 parts. I'll just read the second one to not give anything away. So again, this is the Blood Whisper. So two, at least from what you've shown, Deathless Intelligence, you only now imagine his genetically rare pronounced blood whisper, transporter and purporter of oxygen, heat, and let's be honest, twisted love, could tell you much about the poet I'd have shaped in my own image had I had one. Some say my whisper is overwritten flesh, and I'm just the wind in his corridors he's been reading. But the thump of
Mm,
he and I and she, but I'm not passed on, shared a lifetime of eons before he could breathe. His bloodstream rasps and churns on its own, reliably boring for all of 3/4, but his right leg is mine. My slewed susurrus, spokes whisperer for the syndrome slung over the top. The rumour mill of the heart, never still. Take it from another expert intermingler. The great loves are written in the stars before cell division. You wither him worse in your absence. I feel all. His gut knots, temperature soars, jaw clenches when he reads your lightness of touch in his lines, which was also the lightness for you of your exit back to your planet or plane, while he's left to clutch at a deathless joke which doesn't bear repeating.
excellent, thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed those poems. I found them intriguing. There's something you have to read and reread and sort of see what's going
Yeah.
on there. But yeah, that I love that explanation that it's a bit of a love triangle or a hate triangle going on there. Yeah, a little bit of
Mm.
jealousy.
Oh, hugely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's a sort of a dark humor throughout it as
Yeah,
well. It also
yeah,
tells some of the autobiography of living and growing
yes,
up with this, but through the
yes.
perspective of the Blood Whisper.
Mm,
So there's child versions of me that appear at certain times, and things like
mm,
that.
mm,
But it's an unconventional way to write about such things,
yes.
in a space where I think some unconventionality is necessary, actually, and those
Mm,
to go into those creative surreal ways
mm,
was a way that I could draw this out with its own
mm.
kind of its own life force to a degree. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was very successful. I just this idea that you've got this sort of you know, intelligence living inside you, having its own
Yeah.
experience of your experience. You know, you think you're having an experience, but actually, and I suppose this is true because we are host of many organisms, and so we think
We're
of our,
inhabited.
yeah, we're inhabited. We think of ourselves as some sort of, you know, inherently unified whole, but it's just not true. So I found it, yeah, it opened up a lot of different. My mind was going ping, ping, ping in all different directions when I read that.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And it was yeah, it was something that I hadn't really approached much in poetry before. There's
Mm.
in my first collection there's an ultrasound poem, for example, and there are suggestions of it, but it's something I can
Mm.
feel even now.
Mm.
You know, keep it down, I'm trying to talk.
Your little friend who goes everywhere
Yeah,
you
yeah.
go.
And it's also something I realized because I just got, I get used to it. You get used to your, physical
Yeah.
reality. But then you realize at a certain point, you've grown up in a different way to other people or many other people. And maybe that has affected how you feel and see the world.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, it's you've always had this kind of companion in a way. And maybe um, it's muted me physically as a mutant, but it's also it's probably altered my mind, my sense of things, the way I see the body, the way I see humanity. All of those things I've only actually started to realize since writing the sequence actually and hearing people react to it and reading it and so forth.
Mm.
So I still don't quite know what it is, and that's what I like about it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's funny that it sort of
Yeah.
insisted. It knocked on the door of the collection and said, "Hey, hang on, buddy. What about me? I've been with you all these years."
Mm. That's right, a bit of gratitude, a bit of gratitude.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Give me a, where's my poem? Well, I wanted to circle back to finish off. We're talking a little bit more generally about poetry and Australian identity, because in both of your collections, I mean, there's some fabulous laconic sort of lines, and there's this real sense of Australia, coming through and critiquing that, and also just sort of enjoying it in some ways and seeing issues with it in other aspects. Um, I wondered, maybe I could ask you first, Mark, how consciously do you sort of write into or against like that idea of an Australian identity?
Um, yeah, consciously right against it. It comes forward unconsciously, obviously, because I'm Australian. I grew up in the
Mm,
suburbs, you know. Um, but yeah, having seen that, you then write against it. Yeah. Because we live in prosaic times in a prosaic country. The Australian mind, is fairly prosaic is the word I keep coming back to. And this applies to poetry, to our spiritual lives, to
yeah.
our, to white Australia's inability to engage meaningfully with the Indigenous sensibilities. Yeah, I mean, maybe we're getting better at it slowly. We're
Mm,
being taught, but we're slow learners.
mm,
And you see, or you see Pauline Hanson's antics in a burqa, and this sort of nonsense that
yeah.
is gaining more traction. Yeah, so there's a lot of tension in that respect, actually, because
Mm,
the whole part of Australia is learning, and the other part and another part is reacting. Yeah, I
mm,
mean, you can say this is happening globally, of course, particularly in America and UK,
yeah.
but yeah, most Australians think of a poem, they think of Banjo Paterson, so they think of a poem
Mm,
as a story told in meter and rhyme, and they ask
mm,
what's it about? What happens? Oh well, it's about a bloke who's camping out and catches a sheep, and this sort of thing.
mm, mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, interesting. Excuse my dog, he's waking up.
that's all right.
Um, I was wondering, well, maybe I should ask you first, Toby, about,
Sorry,
if you see yourself as consciously
low on
writing
power.
about Australian identity, or if it's just something that pops up.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean it's yeah, it's something that you can't get out of the grain. And certainly Australian terms of phrase and things like that, I actually
Mm,
find a lot of depth in things, or a lot of unusual depths in things which might not seem
Yeah.
so deep sometimes with certain types of slang and things like that. I've got a poem in my first collection called Sky Show, which a friend of mine reads every Australia Day, which is about bogans beating the shit out of each other at the fireworks for Australia Day, and all of the toxic nationalism that comes along with that. I mean, I'm a student of
Yeah.
history. I know how horrific nationalism is and
Mm,
how it works. And the false promises that it brings, and the lies that
mm,
it you know that it puts out there.
mm,
So I think what I do is I write Australian poems that are anti-nationalistic.
mm. Yeah.
Because um, I'm still very pissed off about being lied to about the history of this country.
Mm,
But
Absolutely.
also I see Australia as something still to become. I see it as something
mm,
which
Yeah.
we can actually, we can grow to become better at. And I'm seeing, yeah, like Mark, evidence of that and lacks of evidence of that
mm.
in various quarters. Nationalism is rising again. I've got a poem about the return of fascism 100 years after
Yeah.
Mussolini's march on Rome,
Yeah.
written 100 years after that, because
Mm,
there's a point where people who viscerally experienced European fascism in particular,
mm,
they've now died out. And so they
mm.
don't have that
Yeah.
visceral reaction to, yes, fascism is wrong and evil. Of course, there was the double paradox of Australia fighting against fascism, but
Mm,
also being a very racist country itself in its foundations.
mm.
And that's right there in the original Australian Constitution. It's not controversial. But I think so I'm always looking for ways to cut down the lazy nationalism that is spewed out at us a lot, but also to look to a more genuine engagement with history, the continent, with First Nations people and perspectives,
Yeah. Yeah.
and to actually encourage an inclusive Australian identity. We don't need to be so scared and paranoid and psychotic. We can tell the truth, we can expand our minds, and we can be cerebral, and we can actually listen to each other. It's one great thing poetry does. When I go to
Yeah,
readings here on the Central
yeah.
Coast.
What role do you think poetry can play in that? Where I'm apparently getting a Australian Poet Laureate next year. I think it's all still very much in the works, but I know.
I'm
So
sorry, I don't think
yeah,
that's a good idea.
yeah. Okay, tell us about that, Mark. What do you think?
Oh, I think, to focus on an individual is misleading, whoever that
Mm,
individual may be.
mm,
I'd be more comfortable if it were a group, a wide group. I haven't heard it articulated exactly what would be expected of a poet laureate.
mm,
The English poet laureate, of course, is there fundamentally to write occasional poetry for coronations and funerals and weddings and things.
mm,
So, I mean, how colonialist is that? You know, I mean, it's imperial.
mm.
Um, yeah, and the Australian poetry scene can be very divided. It can be very
Yeah,
divided,
that's
and
right.
I think would be potentially more so.
Hmm.
You know?
I think that's probably one of the reasons it hasn't happened to date because whenever somebody has tried to
No
set
one
it
can
up,
agree.
there's so much infighting that everyone gives up and
Well,
walks
if you
off,
remember
you know.
the poetry wars, going back to the
Yeah,
late 60s and 70s of the poetry wars,
yeah,
one newspaper famously carried the headline of poetry as blood sport.
yeah. I've experienced that. What are
Um,
your thoughts, Toby?
Yeah, I mean, just to go back to the earlier points, one thing that I do love about poetry, and particularly going to readings here in the Central Coast, like the Saltwater Poetry Slam, shout out to those guys, and many of the other ones. I've been transplanted here recently, so I'm still finding out, about the scene. But there's the Fabulous Words on the Waves Festival as well, and things
Yes,
like
yeah.
that. But one thing about it is that if you go to this, you go to a reading, you'll sit down and you'll listen to whatever someone says.
Mm,
The least we can do is listen to each other, and
mm,
listen to each other
yeah,
in a room with other people, and someone can stand up and say whatever they want. They can say whatever they feel, whoever they are, their experience, and we're sitting in that room saying, "We will listen to you, whatever you're going to say."
mm. mm,
And I think there's something actually which is a bit of a almost like a cure for some of the ills of the world there. Certainly the online world and the isolation that comes with that sometimes. Just being live in a room together and just saying to someone who might be a 15-year-old kid, it could be someone who's 75, I will listen to you. I will sit here
yeah,
and listen to you.
yeah,
And because I think what you say is significant and worthy
yeah.
and worthy of listening to.
That's right.
No matter
It
where
would
they
be
are in
good to
their
get back
development.
to that, wouldn't it? We have lost that somewhat. Now
Yeah, I
there's
think
the
it's still
idea
there.
that
Yeah.
people, it's still there, but the idea that if people are offended, then, you shouldn't say something. I just think this is the worst thing we can do
Mm.
for
Well, even if someone
literature
says something
anyway.
offensive,
Yeah.
they'll still say it and they'll get that live reaction as well. But
Exactly.
I think having
Yeah.
that first step where people are just like, here I am, and I've seen it even in Zoom readings and things like that. So there is
Mm,
some role for the online world, obviously. But I
mm,
think it's perhaps even more enhanced now that we are in such an online universe,
mm,
for people to sit physically in a room together and say,
mm,
I will listen to you,
mm,
and it sort of crowds out the rest of the world. And there's something quite beautiful and kind of ritualistic
mm,
about it, and particularly, I think people are still searching for a lot of, meaning in the world and a lot of metaphysical and personal meaning. And sometimes I teach Australian literature, sometimes it's not so much the content, it's the way that it's taught. So if they can access something in a particular way to see how significant it is, they can
mm,
really love the work of a Henry Lawson or a Christopher Brennan or a Kenneth Slessor or,
mm.
Francis Weber or Judith Wright or, Udra,
Yeah.
Yeah.
whoever it might be.
Yeah.
About the poet laureate, I'm still pretty torn, to be honest. I knew it was going to be intensely political. I was hoping,
Yeah.
like the States, there would be like a junior laureate as well. But I mean, the laureate to some degree is really for the non-poetry public. It's a non-poetry reading
Mm.
public. It's like a bridge. It's almost like they're the poetry diplomat who you have to
Yes.
guide into the public and represent. So I'm sure, if it's, hopefully it'll be an ongoing thing. And then there'll be different people, and some will be terrible and some will be good. And it'll give us something to all, to bitch
Mm.
about to each other, which would be nice.
I
But
heard,
I can see why, yeah, why. And again, I don't know who it's going to be, and that might change my mind a little bit.
Yeah.
But I can see, that there can be a role. We want poetry to be more in everyday people's lives,
Mm.
because people get so traumatized by how badly it's taught at school, and it's this kind of puzzle you have
Mm.
to figure out for the exam, otherwise you'll
yeah,
fail and you'll be a failure and a fool, and and there's such anxiety and such negativity attached to it. To have
Mm.
someone come in and say, no, 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 it's okay. Here's this, here's poetry and whatever. They can build those bridges, but I can see how it could be done really well. I can see how it can be done really badly. The
yeah,
process has been very shadowy, so I don't think that's helped. I'm still very torn about it because I can see the positives and negatives about it.
Yeah.
I mean, they really want to start with someone who can really do it
yeah.
exceptionally well.
I
And there are some good candidates for that. I hope it's someone that I really like. But yeah, I'm still very torn about it, to be honest. And we'll have to just see, I suppose.
A couple of years ago, I heard the New Zealand poet laureate interviewed on the ABC. New Zealand's had a poet laureate for some
Mm,
time, and Brian Turner and others have held it.
mm,
This was a young man in his 20s who was a slam poet and was saying, yeah, yeah, you guys should get a poet laureate and we could have a smackdown. I'll challenge you to a smackdown. And I just thought, what is this? Is this World Championship Wrestling or what? I mean, yeah,
Oh, poetry can
that
be a
sent a
bit like
shudder
that.
down my spine.
yeah, yeah.
And
You
his
Yeah.
get
and the
a
poem he read was appalling.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, I think I agree. I think it's definitely it's an outreach kind of role, isn't it, really? And the
Should be,
person
yeah.
has to be they have to be a good poet, but I think they also have to be the sort of person who does have that common touch and can translate, in a sense, the importance of poetry to the public. But also they are going to have a very thick skin because Australian poetry is quite a sort of a divided world, and there's going to be,
Absolutely.
I don't know if I'd want to be the first one. Let's put it that
No,
way.
no. I really do think that the resources that would go into a poet laureate might be
Mm,
better deployed diversely.
mm,
Mm,
mm.
mm,
Although possibly if it helps to raise the general regard for poetry in the country and awareness of it. As you said, Mark, we're a prosaic country, and maybe having a poet laureate trundled out to do some
Yeah.
more public facing things may make a dent in that.
That would be a special person.
Mm,
Mm, mm.
yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, guys. I thought we might just finish with a reading from both of you. Mark, possibly Swan River Nocturne, which is absolutely stunning
Yeah.
poem from
Okay.
the new collection. And then Toby, I think you're still reading the room. What's in the field? So you decide what you want to read.
I had a few different ones. I've got one about a near drowning at Newport, but I think actually, given the anti-nationalist thing, I should read one from Straya Quartet.
Okay,
Uh,
let's do that. All right. Who will
yeah,
we start with? Who wants to go first?
go with Mark first. He's the
All right.
Oh,
he's
me
the
first. Okay.
yeah he's the
Well,
he's the senior poet here.
okay, young fella. I'll,
I
Settle
mean
down
that
there.
in a good way. I mean as in of a higher stature. I mean.
yeah, right. Uh, yeah, well, like I say, this is a very, yeah, it's an Australian experience, and yeah, it's autobiographical from my time uh, in Fremantle. It's a poem I wrote, at least 10 years after the event that prompted it. Anyway, Swan River Nocturne. It had been a long shift, or so it seemed. I was tired from mopping, vacuuming, scrubbing, tired from pushing hospital trolleys up, down long hospital corridors, tired from caring as I thought I should for every bedridden, burnt out, half spent and impatient patient. I was tired, tired from and of the job, from and of my one-room flat, from and of the half-made poems, the half-formed words, tired of and from the life. I leaned my bicycle against the tree and sat down on the river wall, with the remains of yet another 40-degree day crumpled upon the surface of the Swan like foil. Moonlight, reflective light, reflective of yet another fitful and reflective night to come. I lit a number and felt the smoke work through me. I drifted upon the stone. The water slowly slapped. But someone, somewhere a little upriver, made a shout, and the surface broke before me, surging, rhythmical, muscular. For just one moment, one arching from the dark water, gleaming, wearing that moonlight for skin. And in that moment, that one simple instant, a single moon-filled eye held mine. It was as if I was falling. It was as if there was somewhere safe at last to fall into.
Stunning. Thank you so much, Mark.
Cool. All right, Michelle. Okay. I'm not sure I can read the my anti-nationalist poem after such a beautiful piece.
Of
Okay.
course you
So,
can. You
but
can read anything.
yeah, I probably can. I've got a sequence, yeah, called Straya Quartet, which goes against that sort of that lazy kind of Straya, we're the greatest kind of thing. Um, and it's a four-part sequence. The first is called Just Another Aussie Nazi, about a Nazi I saw in Central Coast, but actually going back to a longer history of the first one I ever knew about in Western Australia, Jack Van Tongeren in the 80s. The second one is about that's called the AFG, popular as ever, and AFG stands for Ahistorical Fair Go, and it's about that cocoon of ignorance. People are quite happy to live in, and then they get a bit upset if you start talking about stuff, and oh, why are you talking about that for? And there's this kind of um yeah, this stop causing trouble kind of thing. The third one's called the National Pastime, which I'll reveal what that means in a moment. And the last one's called the Captains of Fear, and it's about class and the Murdoch press in particular, and on their mega yachts, complaining about the battlers, etc. So they're all interwoven into the same kind of issue in a lot of ways, with sexism and racism, through them all. Um, at the same time, I also want to read this one of survival. So what I might do is read the national pastime, which is about women, and you'll see what it means in a moment. But I wouldn't mind after that reading one from outside Australia Quartet called Sunday After Five, about a real near miss drowning at Newport, as well. So okay, so I'll read this one from Australia Quartet, the national pastime. It doesn't have an off season. It's not abandoned due to rain and can't be overcome by heat. Class and race determine only who stays in the news. It's solitary or family oriented. Thousands don't sense how they even take part in it. Thousands who shouldn't know that they do. Tiniest vessels for such untender rage. What shows is a tell. Hells where men throw control around, love, have to win in the national pastime. Conceive of what else but putting women in the ground.
Yeah, that's a very hard hitting one.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
One way to put it, yeah, and
Sorry.
it's well, it's it's I deliberately wait till the end to reveal what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of Mark's poems do the same thing, where there's that last moment of that's what it is, because it keeps coming along. You know what? I'm going to read the Nazi poem to finish with. I should do a much nicer, beautiful one. There are beautiful nature poems and so on in there, and that one about uh, the near drowning, which is very, very, very close and a real true story. And there's very few of those in Australian poetry, actually. Very few rescue poems like that. Um, but I think given the sort of the gradual and persistent rise in Nazism in Australia, neo-Nazism, and you know, uh, and it's something I've known about from even from a child, which it goes back to with this. The entrance road is the sort of the main kind of highway to the beach around Gosford, and that's where I saw this one Nazi, but only give him a tiny mention at the end, as well. So this is the first one from Australia Quartet. It's called Just Another Aussie Nazi. My first Aussie Nazi was Jack Van Tongeren, Perth's wannabe cosplay Hitler of the hills. He shared a bunker, regalia and doctrine with his followers, flags and slurs and drills, hot-blooded copiers hectic with posters screaming racial war and how to fear Jews and Asians. Jack went down in '89 for firebombing Chinese restaurants on 4 occasions. Once, boys my age snorted Nazis weren't us, but wound up sweaty German klutzes dispatched by Indiana Jones into ravines to cries of Scheiße or the Wilhelm scream. And now, today's tattooed enforcer in a blue sedan is Van Tongeren of the Entrance Road on darkened young land.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Toby. Well, we've been going for an hour and a half, so you could probably go longer, but we probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
But thank you both
Time to
so
play.
much. Congratulations on your wonderful new collections, both out from
Thank
Puncher
you.
and Watman. So please, guys, go and thank you, Toby. Please go and look them up. You can grab them online. Yeah, wonderful additions to Australian poetry.
That's right. We keep striving. We keep striving. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Michelle. And
Okay, thank
Yes, thank
you.
you, Michelle. Thank you very much.
And thanks for everyone for listening.
yeah, thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.